All right, you guys, this is my favorite part. So the very first thing I like to do when I come up to a problem that's asking for the domain and range is sometimes I like to remind myself about the inequality statements. So I know that less than is going to go with an empty circle. And if I have less than or equal to, it's going to go with a filled in circle. Okay, you should have just written that down in your notes, but wanted to remind you of that. So domain, let's start with the domain. We know that domain is the set of all x values. And to find domain on a graph, you should have written this down at the beginning. We look from left to right. So we're trying to find all of the values that are from left to right on this graph. So the very first thing I have to do is find my leftmost point on the x-axis. So I'm going to look at my graph. I see that the furthest point to the left is right here. And I'm actually going to label this LP. This stands for my furthest point to the left. You can also just label it left. I'm going to draw a line up to the x-axis here. So I notice that this is at -4. So the furthest point to the left here is -4. The next thing I look at is this an empty or a filled in circle? This is a filled in circle, so we're going to say less than or equal to, and then we're talking about the domain. So the very next thing we have to write is x. Then I have to go and find my right point. So I'm going to go all the way over here. I notice that this is an empty point, so I'm going to write less than, and then I'm going to draw a line down. So this is my furthest point to the right. And I notice that this hits at 5. So I'm going to write 5. And the symbol we know, since it's empty, is less than. So what this says is the x values are greater than or equal to -4, but less than 5. And we can see that because this graph goes from -4 to 5. All right, let's try our range now. So we know that our range is my y values, and we look from bottom to top. So we're going to start by finding our very lowest point, the most bottom point on this graph. And in this case, I notice that it is the same one that was my left. So you could even call this now bottom. Now the main thing is I'm looking for my y value. So it's not going to be -4 anymore. I'm going to drag this over to my y. And I notice that's crossing at -2. So my bottom number is -2. It is a filled in point. So we're going to say less than or equal to. We are talking about our y value, so the next thing I write is y. Now I need to go find my top point, so I'm going to go all the way up. It happens to be the same one again. This is my top point, but again, we're looking at the y, so I'm going to drag it over to the y, and I notice this is hitting at 4, and it is an empty point. That value is not included, so we're going to say less than 4. And if I were to say this as an inequality statement, I would say y is greater than or equal to -2, but less than 4. We're going to do one more together. I promise it's not as complicated as you think. So let's try one more time. Let's look at this guy. All right, so I always, again, like to start off by drawing myself that little cheat sheet. You don't have to do that, but it might be helpful. I know that if it's an empty circle, it goes with less than, filled in, it's less than or equal to. So let's start by finding the domain. I always, when I see the word domain, write x, and you can even write x values. And on a graph, I look from left to right. This always tells me what to do, L to R. So let's start, you guys, by finding our furthest point to the left here. And if I look on this graph, my furthest point to the left is actually right here. So I'm going to call that left. And the value of that on the x-axis is -5. So my furthest number to the left is -5. It is a filled in point, so we're going to say less than or equal to, and then I'm talking about x. Then I'm going to go find my furthest point to the right, which in this case is not here and not here. It's actually right here at 2, and that is also a filled in point. So we're going to say less than or equal to 2. Okay, now the way I would say this is my x values are greater than or equal to -5, but less than or equal to 2. Let's try our y. Remember, range, I'm going to say it so many times you're going to dream about it tonight, is the y values. We look from bottom to top. Okay, so my very bottom point here, the lowest this graph goes is going to be this point right here. That's the very lowest on the y-axis. And I'm going to draw the line over. So my lowest point here is -2. My bottom number is -2. It is filled in, so we're going to say less than or equal to. We're talking about my range, so y. Then I'm going to have to go see where's the very top point. And it's actually not the same one. It's going to be this guy right here. And I'm going to draw a line over to the y. So this is my top. And that is at 4, and it is filled in. So we're going to say less than or equal to 4. So y is greater than or equal to -2, but less than or equal to 4. One thing I want to show you really quickly, stay with me, you guys, is if I on a graph, maybe my graph looks something like that. And you're like, and there's a point here and maybe a point here. You're like, what would the top point be? There's not actually a point there. Well, guys, we would just look, what's the highest this graph goes? And then we would draw the line over. So on some of them, don't get confused. It might not always be a point. It's just as high. What's the top point of the graph, even though if it's not a perfect point, because these are really a bunch of little points, okay? You got this. Good luck.